2,000 ships drifted in perfect formation, and none of them knew they were already dead. Captain Daniel Ray sat in the dark of a stripped-down shuttle, 40,000 kilometers from the Corlan Nebula, watching the enemy fleet turn slow, lazy circles on his display. Near the center of the formation, one hull was strung with looping lights, the kind used for a parade, not a war. Somebody over there was celebrating something. Ray didn't know what. He didn't care. His hand did not shake. Out here, in the quiet before the order, it never did. 60 years of asking politely had earned Earth exactly 2 lines of rejection, and this fleet, drifting fat and blind in the dark, was about to learn what came after the asking stopped. That was the reckoning, not a speech, not a declaration. A silence that had been building since a man named Lin set down a piece of paper in Geneva and never picked it up again. "Anchors placed, sir." Lieutenant Rachel Doyle's voice came flat through his earpiece, no static, no fear in it at all. Ray looked at the number glowing on his display. 2,000 ships. Every coalition species that mattered, all in one basket, all waiting for a fight that was never going to reach them. "Hold," he said. Somewhere behind that fleet, a Trellin officer was laughing at something on a private channel his side had cracked a week earlier. Ray let it play a second longer than he needed to. Then he stopped listening. His finger found the single switch built into the arm of his chair. No label, no safety cover, nothing to mark it as different from any other switch in the shuttle. It didn't need one. He was the only person alive who was ever going to touch it. "Mark." The word left him plain and quiet, no weight in it at all, and 20 pulse anchors, strung invisibly around the Corlan Nebula, woke up at once. Nothing happened that a human eye could see. No flash, no sound, no warning at all. Just a faint shudder through Ray's own hull as jump space folded in on itself around a fleet that had no idea it was already sealed inside a box with no doors. Somewhere in that formation, the laughing officer's channel cut to static. "You'll want to know how quiet 2,000 ships can go. Stay with me. It gets quieter." 6 months before that, a single sheet of paper had done all the damage a fleet of warships would only later finish. Ambassador Solon Lin stood at the window of his office in Geneva, holding a piece of cheap yellow parchment stamped with the Coalition's gold seal, and read the same 2 lines for the 4th time, in case he'd misread them the first 3. He hadn't. Below him, the city was already awake. A woman walked her dog along the river, a coffee cup steaming in her free hand. 2 boys raced each other across a crosswalk, backpacks bouncing, late for something that still mattered to them. None of them looked up. None of them had any reason to. The letter had come by hand. Every other coalition notice in 60 years had arrived through the secure relay, encrypted, logged, official. This one had been carried in by a junior clerk who wouldn't meet Lynn's eyes, dropped on the desk like something the sender didn't want traced back to them. That was new. Lynn didn't know yet what it meant. He would in about 11 hours. He set the paper down. Earth's application was denied. 60 years of hearings, treaties drafted and redrafted, delegations sent to 100 systems with nothing but good faith and translated speeches. And the Coalition Council had answered with 2 lines, application DENIED. Status, protected primitive world, class 4. 60 years of human effort had been answered with 2 short lines. Lynn picked the letter back up, because some part of him still didn't believe it, and read it again anyway. His aide knocked twice and let herself in without waiting. "The councils open the observer feeds again. They want a formal response by end of day." "Tell them I'm drafting one." He wasn't. He was watching the woman with the dog turn the corner out of sight, and thinking, absurdly, that he hoped she made it home before whatever was coming found her. He didn't know what was coming. He only knew, the way a man knows weather in his knees, that something in the Coalition's tone had shifted. 60 years of condescension had always come wrapped in patience. This letter had no patience in it at all. It read like a door closing, not a door staying shut. He was still holding it when the first alarms started. 12 floors down, in a building that had never once needed them. 40 Dralin warships broke out of jump space above the Pacific at 6:14 in the morning, local time, arranged in a loose crescent that blotted out a piece of pale morning sky. No one on the ground looked up in time to see them arrive. By the time anyone did, they were already in position. Warlord Kelvar watched the readout scroll across his command throne with the mild interest of a man checking the weather. 12 cities lit up on the tactical display, marked out in soft blue, waiting. Primitive, he said, to no one in particular. His 3 red eyes tracked the numbers without blinking. 60 years of paperwork, and they still send children to argue with adults. His weapons officer, a Dralin half his rank and twice his caution, kept his voice level. Orders, Warlord. Kelvar's clawed hand closed once around the arm of his throne, unhurried, almost bored. Begin the lesson. 12 cities, 40 ships. 4 minutes, though nobody watching from the ground yet had any way of knowing the number, or that it would be the last ordinary morning any of them ever had. In Geneva, Lynn was still holding the letter when the first tremor reached his window, and the glass in front of him turned white. Lynn never heard the impact. He was still holding the letter when the building above him turned into white light. Geneva went first. Then the rest came so fast that later, when people tried to describe it, all they could manage was a list. Tokyo, Lagos, Mumbai, Sao Paulo. 8 more after that, cities most of the planet's own population couldn't have placed on a map that morning, gone by the time coffee cooled in the cups people had left on their kitchen counters. 40 ships did it. No landings. No demands shouted through speakers. Just fire dropped from a clean, patient height, city after city, in less time than it takes to walk to the corner and back. In Lagos, a woman named Amara was 3 streets from the market where she sold cloth, and she was thinking about her sister's wedding, about whether the blue fabric or the gold would look better against her sister's skin, when the sky over the market turned the color of the inside of a furnace. She never made it back to find out which color she would have chosen. Warlord Kelvar watched the feed from his throne with his claws folded, unbothered, the way a man watches rain he has no intention of standing in. When it was done, his voice went out on every frequency the Coalition had ever shared with Earth, translated a dozen ways, unmistakable in every one of them. Surrender your weapons within 7 days, he said, or we finish the lesson. Earth did not answer. Not with anger, not with a plea, not with anything at all. Every channel that had once carried Earth's voice to the stars went dark within the hour and stayed dark, and the silence sat over the ruined cities like something with weight. Kelvar found that funny for about a week. Then he found it strange. He never once considered that it might be deliberate. On the lunar base, in the observation deck's blue half-light, Captain Daniel Ray watched a live feed of Tokyo burn from 400,000 kilometers away, and his hands, for the first time in years, were shaking. They didn't shake when he flew. That was the strange part, the part nobody who hadn't lived it would ever understand. Steady on approach, steady under fire, steady until the moment the fight was over and there was nothing left to do but stand still. Then the shake came, small and constant, like something trying to get out through his fingers. His wife had been in Geneva for a conference. His daughter had gone with her because she liked to feed the swans by the lake, and because Ray had promised, months ago, that next time he'd take leave and come too. He hadn't. There had always been a next time before. The last thing his daughter had asked him for, over a crackling line 2 days before the strike, was a stuffed bear from the base gift shop, the kind with a little uniform stitched onto it, because her friend at school had one and she didn't. He'd bought it. It was sitting in his locker 3 decks down, still in the paper bag, tag still on. He was still watching the feed when Admiral Hannah Pierce stepped up beside him, hands folded behind her back, her voice level in a way that took real effort to hold. Captain, Admiral, you've seen the ultimatum. I've seen it. Pierce didn't look at the screen. She was looking at him, the way a person looks at someone they're about to ask to carry something heavy. 60 years, we told our own people to wait. 60 years, we built in the dark and told no one, not even most of our own governments, because the coalition's observers were everywhere, and one leak would have ended it before it started. She tapped one finger against her thigh once, a small motion Ray had learned to watch for. It meant a decision had already been made, and there was no undoing it now. Project Final Word is authorized. Ray turned from the screen for the first time in an hour. Pierce kept her voice flat, the way she always did when the words underneath it were anything but 47 warships. Drone swarms built to a number that will make the Council's engineers weep when they finally count the wreckage. Hidden across shipyards they never found, because we built them in places their scans were never designed to see. She let that sit a second. We are not ready because we panicked, Captain. We are ready because we knew this day was always going to come, and we refused to be surprised by it. Ray looked back at the burning city on the screen. Somewhere down there, or somewhere that used to be down there, was a lake with swans in it. "Wake them up," Pierce said. "Wake all of them up." Ray keyed his comm without needing to be told twice. The order went out in under a minute, encoded in a format the Coalition had cracked exactly once, 6 years ago, and never again since. 12 words. No names. No coordinates. Just a phrase that meant, to a few thousand people scattered across 100 countries who had been living ordinary lives under assumed names for the better part of 2 decades, it's time. In a small house outside a town in Finland, a man everyone there knew as Alexei finished his coffee, packed one suitcase that had been sitting half full in his closet since before his neighbor's children were born, and walked out his front door without locking it behind him. The council chamber had gone quiet in a way Speaker Rel Allen had never heard in 11 years of service, and that quiet was worse than any shouting could have been. 12, he said again, because the first time half the delegates present hadn't believed him. 12 observers. Gone. Not reassigned. Not recalled. Gone from 12 different systems in the space of 4 days, and every single one of them was watching a human colony or a human-adjacent trade route when their last report came in. A Trellin delegate 2 seats down made a low clicking sound that Alan had learned, over the years, meant something close to fear. Coincidence, the delegate said, though it didn't sound like he believed it either. 12 coincidences, Alan said. On the same week, Warlord Kelvar burned 12 of their cities. Nobody answered that. Nobody had an answer that didn't sound worse out loud than it did in their own head. 40,000 kilometers above the mining colony of Vexar Prime, Kelvar's shipyard hummed with the ordinary business of a war he believed he'd already won. New hulls under construction. Fuel tenders moving in slow, lazy lines between docking rings. A skeleton picket of 6 cruisers, because 6 had always, in 60 years of watching this fragile species argue and apologize, and never once bite back, been more than enough. It was not enough. 47 warships dropped out of jump space in a formation too tight and too precise to be anything, but rehearsed 100 times over. And behind them came something the shipyard's sensors had no name for, because no one had ever built it before. A swarm of 40,000 drones, small enough individually to be mistaken for debris, deadly enough together to strip 6 cruisers out of the sky before their crews finished the word for retreat. The picket ships didn't last 90 seconds. The shipyard lasted a little longer, mostly because there was more of it to burn through. Relativistic projectiles, fired from a range Kelvar's people had never bothered to defend against because no primitive species had ever managed the trick before, punched through hull plating like it was paper. On his flagship, in orbit above the burning yard, Kelvar rose from his throne for the first time in months, 3 red eyes fixed on a tactical display that no longer made any sense to him. "That is not possible," he said. His weapons officer didn't answer. His weapons officer was already dead, along with most of the bridge crew, because 6 human soldiers in stealth armor had come through a maintenance hatch nobody on that ship had checked in years, and they hadn't announced themselves before they started shooting. Kelvar turned, claws out, 3 centuries of victories behind him, and every one of them useless in a corridor 2 meters wide. He never made it out of his own dining hall. A soldier named Marcus Chen, no relation to anyone Kelvar would have recognized, no history worth a warlord's contempt, just a man who'd buried his brother's ashes under a tree that no longer existed, put 2 rounds through the warlord's armored chest at a range close enough to see all 3 eyes go still, one after the other, like lights switching off in sequence. "Burn the rest," Chen said into his comm, and stepped back out through the hatch he'd come in by. By the time the flagship's own automated systems finished registering the loss of its commander, Chen's team was already gone, and Vexar Prime's shipyard was a field of drifting slag lit orange from beneath by fires with nothing left to feed them. 3 coalition colony worlds went dark that same night. Not attacked, simply silent, every relay and beacon on each of them switched off within an hour of each other, no explanation offered, no demand made. The Council would not learn until much later that nothing on those worlds had actually been destroyed. That was a mercy Earth hadn't been required to offer, and offering it anyway cost nothing and said everything. In the Council chamber, Alan stood in front of 16 delegates who had, until 4 days ago, considered Earth a rounding error in their long history of managing lesser species. "They are not answering hails," he said. "They are not making demands. They have not asked for territory, for resources, for anything at all. They have simply started removing pieces of us, one at a time, and they have not told us why." A long silence. Then the Trellin delegate, the same one who'd offered coincidence as an answer 4 days earlier, spoke without his usual clicking calm. "Then we assemble, all of us. One fleet, all species, all resources. We end this before it ends us." 16 of 17 votes came back in favor within the hour. The 17th abstained, quietly, and would later claim to have voted no, though no one checked the record closely enough to notice the lie. 2,000 ships. Every hull the coalition had left that could still fly, gathering at the edge of a dead system called Forewarned, chosen because its nebula would mask their sensors from anything trying to watch them prepare. They believed the nebula was hiding them. On the lunar base, 400,000 kilometers from a swan lake that no longer existed, Captain Daniel Ray sat alone in the small locker room 3 decks below the command deck, a paper bag open on the bench beside him, a stuffed bear with a stitched little uniform sitting untouched inside it. He didn't open it further. He didn't need to. He closed the bag, set it back exactly where it had been, and went up to relieve Lieutenant Doyle at the tactical station, because in 11 hours the Coalition's Grand Fleet would finish assembling at Forewarned, and someone was going to have to fly the mission that made sure it never left. Admiral Pierce found him there an hour later, watching the drift patterns of 2,000 ships that thought they were hidden. "They think the nebula is protecting them," she said. Ray didn't look away from the display. "It's not the nebula they should be worried about." Pierce's finger tapped once against her thigh. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." Doyle's hands moved over the anchor, controls the way they moved over anything before a mission, checking a seal twice that only needed checking once, tapping a readout that hadn't changed in 10 minutes. It was a habit her old flight instructor used to tease her about. She didn't stop doing it now. "Anchor's green," she said. "All 20 holding position around the nebula's edge." Ray sat forward in the command chair, the paper bag with the bear in it 3 decks below, forgotten in every way except the one that mattered. "Copy. Stand by." 2,000 ships drifted below them in the dark, arranged in a formation built by people who still believed distance and a nebula's static could hide them from anything. They were wrong about the nebula. They had always been wrong about the nebula. Ray's finger found the switch with no label, the one built for a hand that would only ever need to touch it once. "Mark." The anchors woke together, silent, invisible, and the space around Forewarned folded shut like a hand closing. No ship inside that formation felt anything at first. Then their instruments did all at once, every jump drive reporting the same impossible number, No destination available, no path out, no door. The first relativistic round came a heartbeat later, tearing clean through the Trellin flagship's engine section, and after that there was no more waiting on anyone's part. 40,000 drones poured into the gap between panic and command, small enough to slip past point defense built for missiles 100 times their size. And the coalition's grand fleet did the one thing 2,000 crowded, blind, terrified ships will always do when there's nowhere to run. It turned on itself. A drailing cruiser, firing wild at a shape on its scope that turned out to be a friendly hull, took out a Trellin destroyer in the same breath. A drone took out the drailing cruiser. Somewhere in the chaos, a human transmission went out on every coalition frequency at once, translated a dozen ways. The same 3 lines Kelvar had once used to open a war he never got to finish. "We are not your equal. We are your warning." Lieutenant Rachel Doyle's fighter dropped low along the burning length of the Trellin flagship's hull, close enough that its point defense should have found her twice over and didn't, because half its systems were already dead. She landed hard in a scorched maintenance bay, ran 12 meters through smoke that strung even through her mask, and placed a device the size of her fist against a junction box that had no reason to expect visitors. 90 seconds later, the flagship's own guns swung inward and fired on the fleet it was supposed to be leading. No warning, no mercy, no survivors. Doyle was back in her fighter and clear of the debris field before the flagship finished breaking apart behind her. 9 hours after the anchors closed, the Corlan Nebula held nothing but drifting wreckage and a silence with no edges to it. 2,000 ships, no survivors, no messages. Let them wonder. Somewhere in that wreckage, a name Ray would never learn belonged to a Trellin engineer who had, 3 weeks earlier, painted a small mark on his cruiser's hull for a daughter waiting for him at home. The same way Ray had once bought a bear with a little stitched uniform for a girl who was never going to ask for anything again. Neither man had known the other existed. It didn't matter. The nebula didn't care whose grief it was made of. Pierce's finger stopped tapping her thigh for the first time in days. The council learned of Corland the way farmers on a dozen colony worlds learned it first, without meaning to. A flash of light too far away to hear, crossing the night sky like something falling that never landed. No official word came from Earth. None was needed. Silence, this time, was the entire message, and it traveled faster than any fleet ever could. Speaker Rel Allen stood before what remained of the council 2 weeks later. Only 9 delegates came. The rest had stopped answering summons at all. "They have not asked for our surrender," Allen said, into a chamber that had finally, completely run out of arguments. "They have not asked for territory. They have not asked for anything except to be left where they are." Nobody objected. Nobody had the ships left to object with. Allen made the crossing to Earth alone, in a shuttle stripped of every weapon it had ever carried, because that was the only kind of ship anyone still trusted to send. Admiral Pierce met him on a landing pad outside a city that had, 6 months before, watched a dozen others burn and gone on standing anyway. She didn't offer her hand. She didn't need to. "We tried for 60 years to be let in," she said. "We only want one thing now." Allen waited. To be left alone. He nodded once, and that was the entire negotiation. There was nothing left to add to it, and both of them understood that adding anything would have made it smaller. Thousands of years later, though neither of them lived to see it, and neither would have believed it if told, 2 civilizations occupying the same galaxy had learned to look past each other the way people learn to walk around a place where something terrible once happened, without ever naming it out loud. Captain Daniel Ray retired the way he'd fought, quietly. He planted a cherry tree on a strip of reclaimed ground outside the rebuilt base, in the kind of soil that had needed 60 years and a war to become safe enough to dig into. He never told anyone why a cherry tree. Nobody who mattered needed to be told. Lieutenant Rachel Doyle took to sitting outside most nights, watching the stars the way some people watch a door they don't expect anyone to come through, not out of fear, just habit, the kind that outlives the reason for it. in a drawer in what had once been Ambassador Lin's Geneva office, in a building rebuilt on the exact ground where the old one had stood. Someone found a scrap of yellow parchment years later, its gold seal long faded, its 2 lines of denial still legible enough to read. No one filed it. No one framed it. Someone simply set it back down where it had been found, on a desk by a window that looked out over a city that had learned, at last, how to be quiet. The galaxy had gone silent. Humanity, at last, had been heard.